Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Minister. I stand between you and the rest of your Thursday evening, which I hope will give you some downtime and relaxation. You've been very clear about how this bill is about relief for targeted groups to deal with cost of living issues in the wake of rising inflation. But you'll be aware that there's a growing discussion also about how efforts to combat inflation might be excessive and might lead to a downturn, an economic downturn, perhaps less so in the United States and in Canada, but certainly in the rest of the world, particularly developing countries. Now, this is an issue, I know it's monetary policy, it's not your domain, and it's also principally driven by the Federal Reserve, that's become ultra-hawkish. But you, as our finance minister, meet regularly with the finance ministers of the G7. You will be meeting, I think, maybe with the G20 finance ministers. You're going to the bank fund meetings very soon. What are you saying to them about over-tightening, about broader risk to the system, as opposed to simply dealing with the problems of your own country and being a bit short-sighted about it? I'm worried about Beggar-Thy-Neighbour policies and how they might affect the world and ultimately ricochet back to Canada.
Madam Minister.
Okay, well, that's kind of a question that should have been the first one, and we should have had 5 hours to discuss it. It's a very smart question, and you've touched on a lot of the issues, Senator, that I think anyone thinking about the Canadian economy and Canadians needs to be thinking about. I think that this is a moment when I will be traveling to Washington next week for the IMF World Bank meetings. It's a good time for the finance ministers of the world's leading economies to be getting together for two reasons, both of which you've identified. One is, the way I like to think about it is what's happening right now is we are landing the plane of the COVID economy. We had, when COVID hit, we had this unprecedented thing of the rich countries of the world closing down and providing unprecedented support, COVID recession. Then we had the reopening with the inflationary pressures that came as a part of that, exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, by Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I think we're now in that third act of the COVID economy, and that is, dealing with the inflationary pressures and the economic slowdown that the central bank's work of dealing with those inflationary pressures is creating. And exactly as you say, that work is happening in a global economy where what each country does has a real impact on everyone else. Speaking for Canada, it's important for us to coordinate with our partners, and I will be doing that next week, and I'm glad to have that opportunity. Speaking for Canada, from my perspective, one of the things that we need to do is keep our powder dry. I think this is a moment to recognize that there is a lot of uncertainty in the global economy, and Canada needs to be really ready for that. The good news, I would say, to all the senators and to Canadians is we are in a strong fiscal position and in a strong economic position, particularly comparatively. We do have the lowest deficit in the G7. We do have the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. Our jobs, one of the senators talked, our job recovery from the COVID recession has been remarkably strong. All of those things, I don't in any way want to downplay the challenges of today or the challenges of the future, but maybe I can close on a note of optimism and reassuring us all and the Canadians who I'm sure are tuned in their millions tonight, that Canada is facing these global storms from a position of fundamental economic and social strength.
Thank you, Madam Minister.